Alright, hello and welcome to the video. It's Micah here. I'm talking about, today I'm just talking a little bit about the economy in 2025, late 2025. I think a lot of people are feeling the pressure of this economy in many ways. I mean, let's face it, prices have gone up with the last few years a bit on a number of things. If you go to the grocery store, I'm sure you'd agree, you're seeing closer to like $10 for, an 18 pack of eggs, depending on which eggs you get the idea, right? But, gas has been more expensive for quite some time now. If you remember what it was like back in the early 2000s, we were going through $4 and $5 a gallon gas, and even higher for a while in some areas. But now it's maybe leveled off a little bit, but it's still a bit higher than what we had in the 90s and the early 2000s, for example. So the economy is definitely inflated, right? We'll look at the price of a home these days. I mean, back in the day, I would think, a $200,000 home would be a reasonable size home for, a family of 2 to 4 people, right? But now, you think, in a lot of markets, you can't even find a home for $200,000, a single family detached home, right? A lot of people stay in apartments, rent condos, townhouses are popular, certainly, maybe a more affordable option. But, if you really want your own plot of land, you probably have to go kind of rural. And, and even then, I mean, let's face it, if it's a high demand area, it's going to be expensive to start your building. If you have development done there, depending on how rural we're talking about. But, let's say a new plot of land where construction is actually happening and you have the access to utilities and maybe you can buy a plot and build your own home and everything, very likely you're going to have to do it within some guidelines, right? You're not necessarily going to be able to build the home the way you want it. You're fitting into some neighborhood HOA plan, developer's plan, right? You might have to, stick within some certain models that you can choose from. Maybe you do have more flexibility when you're building your home and your lot. You paid a good amount of money, your lots are kind of separated. But, let's face it, at that point you're not necessarily worried that much about the economy. Maybe you are. I'm not saying that you aren't. But you probably have, pretty comfortable, right? Unless you're stupid with your money, you can afford to live okay, right? You're making, maybe $200,000 to $500,000 a year. Right, but for someone, an average person that makes, anywhere from 25 to 100,000, sure they know what it's like to put in the work, right? Especially if you're making 50 or 100,000 or more, even, you're probably still at the bottom in many ways, but you're working a lot, you're producing a lot of value personally, right? You're having to hustle to make that kind of money. To make more than that, you need to be building a team, a business, probably in most cases, right? Let me know if you run a business. What was your experience starting a business? Did you, find what was most helpful for you increasing the profits in your business? Was it things like getting more employees or a new product offer, upgrading your product offer, a higher ticket product, higher value product that was able to draw bigger clients, stuff like that, or service? What would you do? Was it location? Maybe relocating was a big factor for you in growing a business. For a lot of people, though, that are employee-minded, if you're an employee, it's like working for a business that may or may not be growing, right? Maybe it's a stagnant business. It's, an old school type of business. You produce old school widgets, right? You bake bread, whatever it is, and petroleum-based products, whatever you can find supply line. You can find supply line, you can find points of distribution and always make some reasonable money, have accounts going, stuff like that, right? Make auto parts or something like that, just something. There's a long-standing industry for what you have. Maybe you're in a kind of a newer, groundbreaking industry, a technology industry or field or something, and trying to come up with a new product for investors. Bottom line, in this economy, what is the incentive for investment, right? Whether it's homes or businesses, right? What is the incentive for investment? And I think for a lot of people, they're asking, well, how much control of my own income and my own assets am I going to have, right? So that's going to motivate people or demotivate people to a large extent. Not everybody thinks the same way. A lot of people are motivated for different reasons. But let's face it, everybody, for the general most part, wants to make more money, be more productive, be more prosperous. for their own reason. Maybe you want to give your money away to somebody else, but you want to have control over some money so you can do whatever you feel is best with it, probably, right? I imagine. So, the idea in this economy is to become more wiser with how we're investing our money. Is it invested into real securities and assets, maybe that will increase with some equity over time, which is what really does that, maybe real estate, right? If it gets higher demand there, people want to move there, your equity goes up. At the same time, do you really want to move? That gets into its own debate. It is, everybody has their own debate over that in that situation. Maybe you have a lot of equity in your home, but you don't really want to move, so the equity itself doesn't really tangibly mean anything other than you're living in the place you want to live in. Hopefully, right? Maybe there's other factors. Maybe you're going to lose a bunch of money. You don't want to sell your home because you're hoping the market will come back up. Right now, it's not good. It's flat, or it's going down, or something. Where you're at. And that's another thing too. Is you got to consider this as a regional thing. I mean, different states can have their different reasons. Different cities can be totally different from others, right? Just because we talked about home ownership rates and interest rates across the country and business growth across the country, and it does not ever necessarily representative of the world or any one town or city, right? So you got to think about that. I mean, where are you coming from, and where are most people coming from? But I think that in 2025, I think a lot of people are coming from the standpoint of an inflated market. At the same time, still being able to make money. Like, I think a lot of people are making pretty good money, right? But, you happen to spend it pretty quick because, things cost 2 and 3 times as much as they did 20 years ago, right? Most things, I'm sure you'd agree. If you go to the grocery store, an avocado that used to cost, 75 cents now costs $1.50 or $3, right? And so, you have, just thinking about where's money being spent now compared to where it was being spent 20 or 50 years ago, right? And how is the economy and the entire market changing? I mean, you think just 100 years ago, right? We didn't have, really cars weren't really common. I mean, the airplane was just being invented, etc. Was, becoming a commonplace travel, right? So, but now we have the development of massive increases in communications and the internet, where we're in that era still, right? Of massive communication. What's the next wave? Who knows, right? It's interstellar travel, right? Maybe, or something like that, or different habitats outside of Earth, or some kind of biogenetic development, growth of organs, stuff like that, right? It's just stuff that maybe could bring longer lifespans to humans, right? Stuff like that. In the meantime, we still have our day-to-day life, don't we? We have to go to work. We have, people have children to raise. I don't personally, but, the idea is you have family you got to give attention to, right? And, you value those things in your life that you consider personal. It might not be rational in every sense, but it's rational to you, right? So what are people thinking of 2025? Probably trying to find more purpose for themselves and their families, as I think we're navigating new narratives and shifts in culture, I would say, a bit, right? Thanks to a lot of scientific discoveries and theories that have either been confirmed or maybe discredited, right? Like this whole theories about the Anunnaki and finding ancient cities and the origins of humans on Earth and how we came to be here, right? Whether we're even originally from here, right? All these theories, I think, are getting into the common culture, right? A lot of people are starting to think, oh, wait, this is a different narrative on maybe where we come from. And does that mean that they think that it's true or that it is true? I don't know. I'm just saying, I think a lot of the culture, thanks to the information age, a lot of cross-cultural factors, have happened. A lot of people have, Christians have been exposed to more secular ideas, and seculars have been exposed to more religious ideas. And I say Christian because that's like the most common, just about, Muslim and Christian, Abrahamic type of religion, right? It's like almost the most common, most prevalent in the world, right? Not the only religion, but I think a lot of people have decided is the most common, right? Catholic, Mormon, Christian, Protestant, right? Muslim, right? But more esoteric religions, a lot of them seem to draw from what we to look at as the same tales, right? And you can go back to like all the way to Sumer, right? You think, oh well, humankind has been writing about a lot of the same stuff we talk about today way back then. And you think, wow, these people almost like sound like as if they had almost the same technologies we have to some extent, right? Maybe they had even electricity and stuff like that. Who knows? I mean, right? Yeah, these are theoretical stuff that's going around for the last, don't get me wrong, the last 50 years, 100 people have been talking about it for a long time, but it's just that, we have, we went through book culture, I think, was a big thing for a few hundred years, right? So the printing press and going all the way up till the 19th and the 20th century and still, but electronic communications culture now has just spread so much, and people are in a different state of mind now. People are trying to figure out where our place is in this universe, right? So purpose has different meanings now. People want to find a different purpose, look for a different purpose, still trying to maintain traditions that they are familiar with, right? And so I think the rise of what we have known to be a liberty movement, a pretty strong rise, even globally, of a liberty type of movement that a lot of people consider to be right-wing. I get it. But from another perspective, it might be seen as a rise of a certain kind of anarchy, right? A rise against government, the concepts of government in many ways. Not totally like, wanting to destroy every government, but rather a shift in how government government happens on Earth, right? In a lot of countries. Not every country. And many countries are still stuck in their ways. There's still possibilities of war and all that stuff. And, wars going on all over the Earth right now, probably in a few good places, that it's still happening. But people communicating, I think, has made that a little bit maybe less prevalent in some respects, right? People are able to communicate across the world easier. And that's where another thing too, like the economy. You think about people who are spending their money globally more, right? People are spending their money across the globe more. And these different banking systems we've had, basically stay compartmentalized. They try to, right? But look what happened with cryptocurrency, right? And blockchain, and it's kind of like there's still a lot of potential there, right? Huge potential, but it's going through a massive growth phase, right? A lot of it's being co-opted. You always have to come up with new systems to maintain possibilities of freedom, right? A free market. As I say, this economy's inflated. Wouldn't you agree that it's just because the economy's been inflated so much because it has been heavily co-opted, monopolized to some extent, controlled, right? It's not like we don't have the freedoms that, a lot of countries don't have, but in America, for example, same time, yeah, there is a centralized, subsidized central banking system here, right? So it's not like, and we have a legal tender here, right? If that makes sense. So there is a state-run system here. We're not like just a free civilization with no government. We have government. You say for the people, by the people. But, we have constituents. It's not like every individual gets a say-so in the government. And, probably a lot of us wouldn't necessarily want that, right? Because a lot of people don't seem to think very rational, right? For whatever reasons. They're into drugs and just whatever other mental diseases and aberrations and illnesses. So maybe there's plenty of mentally ill people in the government as it is, right? You get the idea, right? So, the idea is you want to have leadership, community leadership, able to help run the government, but people you can trust, people that are local to your community, that kind of thing, more representative government, right? How real is that? I think it's to a good degree it's real, but is there some truth to a deep state? I think a lot of people would agree there's something that seems to go on behind the curtains with the U.S. government, for example, or it seems to have for a long time, right? And probably still does to a good extent, right? No matter what side you're on, probably there's a lot of stuff we don't know that goes on behind the curtains with government, right? Bureaucracy, payoffs and bribes, threats, coercion, all that stuff, influence, sexual favors, whatever, all kinds of crazy stuff. So you have to be realistic. But at the same time, I think that's part of this liberty movement, though. We want to expose and make more transparent the government of the world and hold the government accountable, because it's kind of like the concept of do we work for the government, or does the government work for us as a people, right? As a culture, as a community. I mean, the government should just be a tool of ours, not the other way around. We shouldn't be a tool of the government, right? This is just my concept behind this. So the people do need to take back more freedoms, and this means economic freedom, right? Take back economic freedom. People spending their money where they best see fit, and having those incentives in the marketplace, and meaning that, hey, if you're going to go to work and put in the work in the economy to be productive and try to make a living, you want to be able to keep most of the fruits of your productivity, if not really all of it, technically, right? Same time, what are taxes? One concept is, coercion, theft, right? Slavery, a percentage of slavery, however you want to call it, right? From another perspective, maybe taxes are the rent we pay to live on someone else's planet, right? Someone else is making a claim to the property. Someone else has already done that, right? So, in a sense, you might consider it a rent you pay to live on someone else's planet. Does that mean that you're going to feel like that? No, you probably feel like, hey, I have absolute freedom as an individual. I'm a sovereign. But at the same time, bottom line is, do we really own anything? Any of us? Not really. Like anything I'm saying, anything can be taken from me at any time, potentially. It's not like, yeah, sure, we defend our property, our rightfully obtained, freely obtained property, right? Yes, that's the concept of this liberty, but it's still a social construct, right? We all have to agree on it, if that makes sense, and not everybody does agree on it. Let's face it, not everybody does agree on it. So, just, about the cultural changes. Let me know what you think about the cultural changes. You're watching this video this far. What do you think about cultural change in 2025 in North America, for instance, or even in your part of the world? How has culture changed? You happen to watch this and be listening to what I'm talking about at all. I'm just rambling, obviously. But what are the cultural changes that would you say have happened in your local community or your country or state, wherever you're at? You're probably in America. I imagine most viewers of this video probably are. But, maybe you're somewhere else. If you are in America, certainly share with me. What do you think is some major cultural shift? And I get it. We can get into politics and argue, Trump this and that, or, Biden this and that, or Obama, whatever. I'm not talking about so much that. I'm talking about more the mindset of, how culture might be shifting. You think about from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, the 70s, and this like the 50s, more traditional nuclear type of thing, folk music, traditional, old school. In the 60s, all of a sudden, maybe more of the psychedelic type of thing, music, rock, music, blues, all that stuff kind of came into the culture. Then in the 70s, you think, more of, I don't know, it's hard to say how I would describe the 70s, maybe a little more of the 60s, but moving into this, new age music generation, right? Disco, right? Then into video, right? Gradually into video. Then in the 80s, all of a sudden, you kind of really get the true pop star, right? The 80s glam pop star, right? And that starts gradually moving into, the 90s. Think about, pop star became bigger than ever, and it kind of moved into a more cathartic type of musical realm where I think that music, it started going from hair music to grunge, if you will. So just a little bit differently. People thinking about going out to party on a Friday night to go into talking about depression and drug usage and abuse and stuff like that, right? So it's teen angst, right? All that kind of shift. And then, going to 2000, you got all of a sudden you got the Obama presidency, and not necessarily talking about, the politics of it per se, but how the culture changed from, going to that old school kind of happy-go-lucky conservative feel of George Bush to the Obama years, right? And people are in this post-2000 era, right? And, people are probably pretty optimistic. I think a lot of Americans are optimistic because, regardless of how you see it, bottom line, a lot of people felt optimistic about the idea that we're getting away from Bush, right? I think a lot of people felt like that, right? And maybe you don't, maybe you feel like Bush was great and everything. You don't feel that way, but maybe you can kind of see where I'm coming from in terms of a lot of people felt that way, right? So, there's in some ways still a pretty good economic time. But then what happened? We had the housing market crash, right? The housing market crash. Maybe you experienced some of that in some ways. Maybe it was good or bad for you. Let me know. You had the 2008 and the big banker bailouts and TARP and Hank Paulson and all that stuff, right? So really, just probably in many ways more of what we saw in the Bush administration and so forth, right? I mean, the same people seemingly in charge. But, in terms of the culture of America, I think all of a sudden that's when everybody got really crazy. In terms of the economy, 2008 and 2010, things started inflating more, right? And whatever, it's raining. But I think things started inflating a bit more. Gas was getting up to, $4, $5, $6 a gallon all of a sudden. And, houses and home prices gradually increasing. Interest rates increasing, gradually becoming harder to get a loan for a home, right? Because all of a sudden now, after that bailout and everything like that, all of a sudden, the housing market's crashing a bit. But people can't necessarily just get a whole bunch of easy loans now because the interest rates are higher, the qualifications are higher, right? Now they have to do real loans, can't just do all these fake, overextended and ARM loans and all that stuff, right? So because now the Fed is more on top of it, has to be, it's a pressure. But then even got to the point of this liberty movement. People are tired of the government bailing out banks, right? People are tired of too much corporate socialism, which turned into the whole entire thing, just saying, hey, look, we're tired of too much socialism. Well, a lot of people started saying, right? A lot of people started saying, even many of the people who just previous 10 years were optimistic about Obama were now thinking, well, wait a minute, because they didn't necessarily see what they might have expected out of those years, right? They didn't necessarily see, not that like liberals would necessarily expect constraints in the market, but, just in terms of seeing money being spent in the right way for sure, right? Instead, we saw the massive, national debt up to 15, 20 trillion dollars, now more, right now higher than that, like $30 trillion. So overall, I think a lot of people moved over to the liberty side. Even if you're from the left a bit, you're still thinking, wait a minute, maybe our country's spending too much money, right? We're bailing out these banks. That's not what I want as a liberal. Maybe that's what a liberal probably might be thinking. Wait a minute, we're not wanting to bail out these banks. Yeah, we want some socialism, but that's not what we have in mind. That's just helping out big banks, right? Stuff like that. So this is just my concept of where people have gone over the last, couple of decades. And, now we're kind of going, we had the whole COVID season, right? So COVID happened and, people kind of got real insecure for a few there, like wondering, well, what's the worst that could happen here? Some people really believe that COVID is a great risk to them. Other people are just, not wearing a mask and not worried about social distancing, etc. So you got this broad, array of people, but, like supposedly a lot of people passed. So if that's the case, I mean, probably a lot of those people felt uncertain. A lot of their families felt uncertain, like what's going on, right? Other people might not have felt like they saw anything much going on, right? And felt like maybe it was over-exaggerated for some other agenda, right? For some other agenda. some other reason that they're doing this global shutdown, right? Who knows what it really is? All kinds of theories, right? But I'm just saying in terms of the reasons that were out in front of us, COVID, right, is this deadly new virus that, has to be, all have to do all these new protocols for, right? Governments have to start spending all this extra money for, right? All of a sudden the price of everything's going up higher, and everybody has to work at home and this and that, So I think a lot of people reassessed purpose and security, what means to be secure after that, right? Maybe people have been around for a while. Maybe you went through some things like that in the past. But I think for a lot of people from my generation and younger that, hadn't really ever seen anything quite like that, didn't know what to make of it, right? Didn't know what to make of it. So in a post-COVID era, right, at least in this entire era of, say, the last, 50 years or so, 50, 70 years, right? I think before that, you had World War II. I think, people could expect anything at that time. Who knows? It's paranoia and all this, all kinds of thoughts going through people's head at those times. But, after 50 years, 70 years of generally speaking easygoing times in America, I think Americans would be pretty complacent, right? Pretty complacent. So all of a sudden something like COVID happens, kind of gets people a little bit, back into the paranoia stage, if that makes sense. So now people are trying to find new purpose. They want to bring back the economy and tradition and not have to think about, some alien virus and, and a lot of the stuff that I hate to say it kind of came from the left over the last few years, but just trying to throw in a lot of everyday Americans off their focuses of the economy, right? Economic well-being, right? All of a sudden, the government's $30 trillion in debt, right? And we're debating whether money should be spent, studying how shrimp swim or something, whatever. There's all kinds of different government programs out there that I think a lot of people are against. This whole immigration crisis, if you will, the idea that there's a crisis in America of illegal immigrants. I'm sure there's a few that certainly there's bad seeds in the mix. At the same time, I don't know. Immigrants in general, even if they're illegal, generally probably commit lower violent crimes and actual crimes of aggression against other people, like straight theft and so forth, than even citizens of America. So that's kind of a two-way street. I think a lot of people, just my speculation, I think a lot of people are wanting us to just simply properly enforce the border laws that we have, right? And the idea is just enforcing the border laws that we have. A lot of people don't necessarily think, they want to get rid of every person just because they're an immigrant or a legal immigrant per se, deport them all. I don't think a lot of people think like that, but a lot of people are thinking that we should enforce the policies we do have. I mean, if we have a border, we're going to have a border or we're not going to have a border. So in that respect, the fairness of it. If you're going to come to the country, they're thinking, well, at least knock on the front door. Do it legally, right? And wait in line like others have, right? Like others currently are. I think it's the way a lot of people feel about it, right? They're not necessarily anti-immigrant. Certainly there's a faction of people that are totally anti-immigrant for whatever reasons, and, religious-based, ethnicity, race-based, who knows, right? There's a few people out there like that, but I think like I say, for the most part, a lot of that movement being attracted to this whole Trump era in some respect come from people that feel like that. They don't necessarily see the way Trump puts a lot of it out there. They don't, most people want to think of it in a brash way, but like you said, something like that, they're probably thinking, we do want to enforce a rule of law with that kind of stuff, right? And the same thing with crime too, not just, not like nobody gets a second chance, but rather, crime is dealt with genuinely. I mean, bottom line, if you commit theft, or, aggression, homicide, you do face justice, right? It's not like, theft is always justified just because you're poor or you're whatever skin color, right? No. We're starting out as individuals, ideally with all the same rights to gain property, right? To acquire property, work for a living, be productive as we want to be, as the people we want to be. Maybe we won't be as productive as the next person, as successful as the next person, but we have the freedom to be, to the greatest extent, who we want to be, right? Don't we value that? That's why I think a lot of people are looking at liberty in in coordinates with some social ideas. Not like every libertarian-minded person has gone totally like austere, right? Like a lot of people would propose. But I think a lot of them want to see more money and wealth in the hands of the people, right? And you'd have more incentive to make your own living, right? To gain that self-respect or dignity of knowing that you did make your own living, right? In that way. So, anyway, there's just a few ramblings. Like I said, just let me know what you think about the cultural shift of 2025. And how about religion, and how people view religion. I think a lot of people are getting back to religion in many ways, surprisingly, right? Kind of countering all this technology we have, cell phone and stuff like that. People feel like, hey, this is a little too much. Let's get back to tradition, face-to-face, by the fire type of mindset, family, right? So I think that's actually, in many ways, for many people, coming back. But there's a large faction of people I think are still in the realm of maybe tying things together. How does a lot of religious views and scientific views actually coincide? Right, and developing new views out of that. That's just my thoughts on it. But hey, this is Mike here. Let me know if you drop by and listen in. Of course, I appreciate a like, or if you want to subscribe and maybe catch up, maybe have something else to talk about that you want to listen into for a few minutes. Of course, the longer you listen, the more I appreciate it. Looking for more people that are like-minded, maybe even just like you. All right, thank you for listening in. Maybe check out if there's another video. Check it out. Maybe something else to talk about. All right, see you next time. Have a great one. Bye-bye.